What makes a book difficult to read? What counts as a hard book? Interesting questions. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I am doing a tag created by Paul, the Accidental Bookseller. It is 5 of the hardest books I've ever read. I was tagged by my friend Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. And this tag really has only one prompt. It is to tell you the 5 hardest books you have ever read. Now, I do have to go over this in my mind. What makes a book difficult? What makes a book hard? I think Alan mentioned this as not really a hard book. This is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. It is very long. It is possibly the longest or second longest book that I've ever read, depending on how you want to count pages. Its only other contender for length would be Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. But War and Peace, despite its length, despite Tolstoy having some diversions into philosophy and history, really isn't very difficult other than learning the Russian names. So I cannot justify this as a difficult or a hard book. But what books really are hard to read? First off, I want to talk about Ulysses by James Joyce. I have read this book twice in my life. Or should I say, I listened to the audiobook only in the late 90s, and I got some of the quality of the book just listening to the audiobook, but not enough. And then was it in 2022, or was it 2023? I joined or helped create with Alan a reading group for Ulysses, and I was joined by the Ulysses 6. And we just had a fantastic group read going through Ulysses. But why is Ulysses so difficult? Well, James Joyce was basically started a modernist movement in writing where he broke the form of the novel and what the novel was supposed to do. This novel is, in essence, a one day in the life of Leopold Bloom. He gets very complicated. He gets into the stream of consciousness, into the mind of his characters. And not just that, into some very interesting allegories and descriptions of things that are happening in Dublin, women's pregnancy and the development of fetuses. That may not be exactly how they're described in the book. It was a few years ago. But this book requires an awful lot of attention from its reader. It is not supposed to be easy. It is supposed to be engaging the reader in the text and making the reader wonder what exactly is going on, even though James Joyce can be very clear about what's going on when he wants to be, but he does not always want to be. And it has some fabulous scenes. It has Leopold Bloom on the beach doing things that I guess men should not be doing on the beach, but lots of men do on the beach when they are observing young ladies. And then it has the magnificent last chapter of Molly Bloom, the cheating wife of Leopold Bloom. And it's just a fascinating look into the human mind, making the human mind sort of accessible in text to a reader. But to read this book, you have to go slowly, I think. I did this over 2 months, just reading, 10, 15 pages a day while listening to the audiobook. And some of this is still beyond me. I know it is one of Alan's favorite books, and he annotates the hell out of his copies, or most of his copies, writing down what this scene means. What was Joyce really getting at? Now, I did not do that. I am not an annotator. I just read and listened to this book, but I did get a lot out of it. It is a fantastic journey into literature, and I highly recommend that everyone try to read Ulysses. Give it a shot. Take it slow. It is a fantastic book, but it's not necessarily a good book. I know that's sort of a contradiction in terms, because it's not good because it's not easy. It's hard. It requires a lot from its reader. And that sort of distracts you from the book a little bit, in my humble opinion. The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, originally published in German in 1924. This, on its surface, is the story of Hans Katzorp. It is before World War I, and he is going to visit a friend in a sanitarium. It's supposed to be a 2-week visit, somewhere along that length. But as he is visiting, the doctors convince Hans that he is actually tubercular himself and needs to spend some time in the sanitarium. And this supposedly short stay turns into years. And it is all about Hans Katzorp's experiences in this sanatorium. But Thomas Mann does not really give much of a plot. Other than that, there are some interactions between the characters, what they feel for each other, what they do with each other. But it is the exploration of philosophy and the meaning of life. And there are some incredibly deep dives into knowledge, of which I don't necessarily say I can understand everything, because Thomas Mann was a true intellectual giant, and I cannot match his intellect. But I can appreciate this. I do have lots of tabs in this book about fascinating passages. I do not annotate, as I said. I just read this book on the surface and appreciated it for what it was. I could see these huge rabbit holes of philosophy just aching for me to dig deeper into the chapter, to stop reading, to start understanding the true depths of Thomas Mann's knowledge. I chose not to read that way because, as I said, I'm not a note taker. I'm not a person who makes annotations. But this is such a fascinating and intellectual novel that I'm going to have to reread it one day. The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, originally published in 1929. This is the story of the Compson family, especially Caddy Compson, William Faulkner's heart's darling, as he used to like to describe this character. But what's interesting is that Caddy Compson is never seen directly in the story. It is all about people's memories of Caddy, what they thought of Caddy, which is sort of a strange way to write a story about a main character. But truly, I think that's a fascinating way to look at it. You can have important people in your life, in your memories, who are no longer there, but they fascinate you, they captivate you. And this is what William Faulkner does with Caddy Compson. But William Faulkner tells this from 5 different perspectives, a lot of it in stream of consciousness. Now, the first section of this book is by her brother, Benji. Benji is a mentally disabled man. I'm not sure how intelligent he is, and he has no sense of time. That's one of his problems. So in the story, that he's sort of narrating in third person. I know it's kind of complicated, but if something reminds him of something in the past, he will go relive that image in the past, that life in the past, with no introduction, no stepping aside. It just slips from one time to another. And when Faulkner originally conceived of this novel, he wanted the Benji sections to be printed in different colors of ink to show you what time Benji's mind was in. And the publisher said, no, we can't do that. That's way too expensive. So they have this sort of clunky system where you'll have 3 lines in italics, which tells you time is shifting. And Benji really is just an observer, and all over these times. So it's interesting, but you have to pay attention. You cannot let your mind wander. You have to say, okay, well, what timeline am I now in Benji's mind? And then you have the 2 brothers. You have Quentin, who is a Southern man going to study at Harvard in Massachusetts. So he's going to be an outsider already. And then you have Jason, the nasty Jason. He is a mean, awful man. And that awfulness just oozes off the page. And then you have Dilsey. Dilsey is their African-American servant. And her section is really rather straightforward for a William Faulkner book. But the story is just great. And the writing is great. This is Faulkner reinventing the way a novel can be by introducing lots of modernist theories and techniques that were not often done before Faulkner did it. A great book, but still a very hard book to get through. Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, originally published in 1973. The judges for the Pulitzer Prize Committee unanimously voted for this novel, but they were overruled by the Pulitzer Board, who said the novel was too difficult. It was too strange. It was too obscene to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize, because the Pulitzer Prize was supposed to be about American life. And they thought, this really isn't about American life. This is just something outside of that realm. And I can understand both parties. I can understand why the judges would want to award this book the Pulitzer Prize. And I can understand the committee saying, you've gone a step too far. The country is not ready for a book like Gravity's Rainbow to be winning the Pulitzer Prize. So I understand both sides of the story and sort of agree with both. And the problem with Gravity's Rainbow is on its surface. At the very beginning, you have a man named Slothrop. He is working in London during World War II. And when he has a romantic liaison with a lady, he likes to put a pin in a map, saying, I laid this lady here. And someone has noticed that those push pins in the map are corresponding with the landings of V2 rockets, that somehow Slothrop's erections are predicting where the rockets will next land. So naturally, military intelligence wants to get their hand on Slothrop. That is just the first part of the book. But as Alan at Big Hard Books and Classes says, it's all a red herring. The book really isn't about Slothrop's erections and about the V2 rockets. It veers off into many different directions, many different diversions. Some of these diversions are really rather interesting. Some of them are really rather annoying. Thomas Pynchon has a fondness for conspiracy theories. He has a fondness for acronyms that some readers find utterly fascinating. They find great meaning in these acronyms and these conspiracy theories. Now, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but some people do. And maybe that's why some people find this book utterly and totally fascinating. But it's a long book. It's over 800 pages in most editions. And you have to wade through all of this knowledge that Thomas Pynchon is throwing at you, seeing what will stick to the wall like some spaghetti. And why I found it interesting, I did enjoy it, I really got to the point where I'm saying, move on, Pynchon, let's get to the story. Okay, it's not about erections, but what is it about? It's about Slothrop in Europe avoiding being captured and all the encounters that he has. And then there is something about a rocket, a special rocket that Slothrop is moving towards. Is this a great book? Yes, but again, like Ulysses, it may not be a good book because its density is very difficult to get through. You have to wade through all this detail that Thomas Pynchon is throwing at you. But that still does not fail for me to say, I think most people should try to read Gravity's Rainbow, at least the first section. And once you get into the weirdness in the later sections, if you throw in the towel, you throw in the towel. But you still tried it. Dhalgren by Samuel R. Delany, originally published in 1974. This is a science fiction novel, but it is also a literary novel. For that reason, a lot of science fiction fans don't like this book very much. They're saying, why are you putting literature in my science fiction? And I guess some literature fans are going, why are you putting science fiction in my literature? So it is a cross-genre novel. And to give you an example, the novel opens with the last half of a sentence. And it ends with the first half of the sentence. And if you are familiar with that structure, it comes directly from James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. And on the surface, this is the story of the kid. He has amnesia. He does not know his real name, and he's wandering into this city. The city is sort of lost in a neither zone. It is out of time, out of place. You can go to it, you can leave it, but when you're in this city, you're not anywhere else but this city. There are two moons above the sky. There are people from the future, people from the past, all intermingling in this book. This book, when I first tried to read it, I was about 15 years old, and I got stuck. It's a complicated book just on its own, but it also has some graphic sex scenes, graphic homosexual sex scenes, which to a heterosexual 15-year-old boy were just really rather puzzling. It took me into my mid-20s to be able to read this and understand that, okay, it's just a gay sex scene. I can read about it. I don't have to get emotionally involved. But there's also some other oddities in this book. It has no real plot line. It's just the kid roaming around the city, talking to people, writing poetry, putting writing into his journal. And this journal is rather important because when he gets to the city, the kid finds a journal. This journal has already been written in. He does not know the author of this journal, but he decides, I don't have any journals of my own, so I'm going to write in the margins of this journal. So what happens at the end of this book? You get the journal that the kid is carrying. And you notice there are text that sort of intermingle. That means some of the text is from the journal and some of the text is from the margins. For that reason, I highly recommend reading a physical copy of this book. So when you get to this last section, you can understand what's going on in the text. The ebook version, which I have, does not replicate the text as it is on the page, and neither does the audiobook. So pick up a print copy and explore this world of the kid. It is completely fascinating. J.R. by William Gaddis, originally published in 1975. This is one of my favorite novels of all time. This is a massive postmodern novel. It is 770 pages long. It has no chapter breaks, and it is about 90 to 94% unattributed dialogue. So, as a reader, again, you have to be paying extra attention, especially when a scene changes. Now, sometimes Gaddis will help you out. He'll put in a little bit of a prose paragraph after some dialogue, and that's sort of your hint that the scene has changed. Now, what this novel is essentially a satire on American business. And I think that is really rather important in this day and age because the business practices in this book are really rather shady. And they seem to be the same shady business practices being done today. Business has really not outgrown that since 1975 when this book was originally published. And honestly, this book is probably taking place in the late 60s, mid-60s, maybe even the late 50s. It's a little bit unclear in the story when the story is taking place. And essentially, this is the story of J.R. He is a 12-year-old boy who amounts a massive financial empire based on nothing at all. Just him buying things on promise and then using what he has to promise another buy. So he's an actually broke kid with no money in his pockets, but on paper, he has a vast financial empire. And people start listening to what this vast financial empire is doing because he's gaining control of lots of business without actually having any money. I know. Would that seem impossible in this day and age? Maybe not. And I guess it was not impossible back in the day when J.R. was published. And the characters are just so quirky and interesting. You have the music teacher, who is sort of the front man for J.R. All he wants to do is write music, but he keeps following J.R.'s advice and getting deeper and deeper into these shady business plans. Again, a satire on American business, and I absolutely love it. I also listen to the audiobook while reading this book because the book is complicated. The voices are difficult to understand sometimes, even though William Gaddis has a very good ear for how people speak. But in any case, this again is one of my favorite books of all time. Okay, that was actually 6 hard books. I had put the 6 hard books on my desk, and I decided when you do the video, decide which one you want to exclude. I'm not going to exclude them. I'm just going to have 6 hard books in the 5 of the hardest books I've ever read tag. Okay, sue me. I'm not going to tag anyone because some people just don't like hard books or difficult books. But if you are one of those people, please feel free to do this tag. Thank you very much for watching and keep on reading.